Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Business Hub podcast. I'm your host, Don Workman. This is a podcast we have devised to help small to medium-sized businesses with information, takeaways, advice in a wide variety of areas. And today our topic is going to be cybersecurity. It's something that's really come to the forefront in recent years. And I've got one of the leading experts in the field here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, Mr. Todd Haness. He has his own company. I'll let him tell a little bit about himself, then we'll get into our question, answer, and discussion for the afternoon. Okay, Mr. Todd, welcome. Glad you could take some time out. Hope the family is well.
I appreciate it, Don. Thanks for having me on. And yes, we are one of the leading providers of IT support and cybersecurity here in North Texas. So DFW, Plano, and Garland. We're an MSP, which is a managed service provider. So we help small businesses with IT support and cybersecurity solutions.
That's great. And at the end of this, what we'll do is we'll give you an opportunity to give the listeners an email where they could reach out to you in case their small company needs some cybersecurity protection or just some advice on which solution to use. Okay?
Sure. That sounds like a plan.
All right. Let's dive into this. We're going to talk about cybersecurity in small businesses, but even mid-sized businesses lack in that area, but are catching up. So I'm not going to say that not everybody's lacking, but there's some that maybe just have not thought about it, put it on the back burner. Well, here's a chance to get some advice from a professional. So the first question is, a lot of small and mid-sized businesses think hackers only go after the big guys, but that's not really true, is it?
It's not true at all. And a lot of people assume that. And it's not only a dangerous assumption to have, but it's usually a fatal assumption to have. The reality is 43% of cyber attacks happen to small businesses. Most small businesses are just not prepared for that. So what they think is that they're too small for hackers to actually want to attack. And that's the opposite of what happens. Hackers are not, they're not sitting in their basement. They're not trying to figure out ways to kind of break into Fort Knox. What they're doing is they're running these automated programs, these automated tools that are scanning thousands and thousands of businesses at the same time. And what they're doing is they're looking for vulnerabilities. So if you're one of the businesses that has that vulnerability, what they're going to do is exploit you. So they're looking for the path of basically least resistance. So it's not that they're personally coming after you, it's just you're a mathematical casualty. And just to kind of give you an example, we work with a lot of companies that think they're too small. And let's give the example of a local accounting firm. They only have 8 employees. They've been in business for maybe 20 years, and they think that they're too small and nobody's going to bother them. Well, using these automated tools that are looking for these vulnerabilities, they get hit with ransomware. The ransomware, let's say it's $25,000. It may not sound like a lot for that type of company that they can probably pay that ransom, which in the event of a ransomware attack, most of the time you are paying it, but that's not the damage. The true damage happens with the other things, with the loss of clients. That's a huge one. It damages your reputation to where people don't want to work with you anymore. So you lose that revenue. You're having to pay for emergency IT support. You're having to pay for time spent recovering your data, whatever they've taken. So that's a big problem. And then the reality is, if you've suffered those losses, that 60% of small businesses that get a ransomware attack, they go out of business within 6 months. So it's not the ransomware that's putting you out of business. It's everything that happens afterwards. So what we usually tell people
60%.
is, if you're not doing something, 60%, it's absurd. Just imagine if you lose half your revenue of a business. I mean, what are you going to do? You can't rebuild your business that's happened over 20 years and overnight. So you're trying to recover from the damage that's been done by that cyber attack. So it's not a matter of having to have some sort of protection in place. It's a necessity. And if you don't have that in place, then you're the lowest hanging fruit those cyber attackers are looking for.
That's mind-boggling. So, I mean, as someone, I can speak to this because this happened to me a couple of years ago. Somebody hacked into my email, got clients' information, and tried to get money from one of our carriers on their saying well, they were them, but their cybersecurity put an alert out and wouldn't let it happen. So thankfully, but it became a thing and we got all cleared up. But you mentioned something. The reputation is priceless. You lose
Right.
60% 50% of your business. You use the accounting firm, and I don't think it really matters what line of work or industry you're in. That if your reputation takes that kind of hit, man, so
Yeah.
it's you really can't put a price on the reputation part. And so the follow up question I have is maybe you answered it, but maybe and you can kind of let me know. So why smaller businesses are often the biggest targets?
They're the
Is
biggest
it
targets
because of the
because, yeah, I was going to say it's because hackers and cyber, bad actors know that they have the least amount of resources available to do that. So as you know, small businesses, you wear a lot of hats. So if you're wearing a hat of cybersecurity and you're not a cybersecurity expert, you have no idea what you need to be doing to secure your work environment. So that's what these, cyber attackers are looking for. They're looking for people that don't have the resources. So if you don't have the resources to do it, again, you're the lowest hanging fruit. You're easy money for them. You're easy to exploit. The bigger businesses have plenty of resources, so they have dedicated teams that are fighting these things on a,
just this kind of reiterated to me the importance of why we did this episode on cybersecurity. I'm glad that you agreed to do this because like you mentioned, a lot of small business or even medium size. I mean, let's be honest, people just don't know or they just don't have the knowledge, especially if you've had a company that's been around 20, 30 years and you think you're still in the 1990s when you might have had dial up and nobody really bothered you. 2025 is a new day for everybody and people need to be aware, and I think this episode is going to be useful for a lot of people. Again, I do appreciate you coming on here. So our next question is, when you talk to business owners, what are some of the most common cybersecurity mistakes you see them making?
well, I hate to say, they make a lot of mistakes, and because they don't think they don't think they're the targets. Probably the number one thing we see when we do, and what we like to do a lot of the time is we'll do a risk evaluation. How do you really look if someone breaks into your environment, someone breaks into your business, what are they going to find? Well, most of the time what we find is they have terrible password management. So by password management, you have to have complex passwords that are hard to guess, that are changed in everything you use. So you can't use the same password over and over again. So what we typically find is that someone will have, and people always think they're so clever by using their kids' names or their pets' names or their wife's name or whatever it is. Those are very easy to guess. The problem is they use the same passwords at every website, everything they log into, because they can remember it. That's the worst way to do it. So we usually will show someone a dark web report, which shows the passwords that are exposed on the dark web, which a lot of the times they'll say, well, I don't use that website anymore. I don't bank with that website anymore. Well, you might not bank with a website, but I can tell that you're using the same password on 40 different websites. So as soon as that password's exposed, what they do is they sell it on the dark web, and then whoever buys it on the dark web uses it to try and log into every other website that you have access to. All they need is one. They just need one hit, and then they've paid their money back for the 5 cents they paid for your email password or your password that was exposed. So number one is probably weak
I think everybody's
passwords.
guilty of that.
And everybody thinks that they're not going to guess my passwords, but passwords they're exposed on a daily basis. You hear about breaches all the time. This company got breached, that company got breached, which isn't a big deal if you change your passwords on every other website. But most of the time people are using the same one. So if you're using the same one, then you run into a big problem. And it's an easy fix.
Do
The
you
fix is use a password manager.
So here's another question, maybe not really on the script, but just something from my experience because I spent so many years in tech before. There's a lot of small companies that don't have policies in place to not go to sites that say otherwise would not be work related, and does that not open them up to cybersecurity attacks as well?
It can. The issue with passwords is typically you use the same passwords in your personal life as you do in your business life. So if your password's exposed on the dark web for your Gmail account, well, if you're using the same one in your workspace, well, then that's a problem for your business. It's not necessarily that they don't have the proper cybersecurity protection in place at the company you work for or the proper policy in place. It's just that you're commingling your work life and your personal life, and that's kind of hard to defend. So we can keep people out. We can keep people from going to websites and whatever they're going to that might be potentially harmful to your business. But the reality of it is it's the human factor. It's the human factor of not changing a password or clicking on something they're not supposed to click on. That's usually
Right.
what where people run into problems. You can have the best security in place, but it's the user that typically is the one that's your weakest line of defense.
Okay. So how would a business even know where if they've been hacked or compromised? Are there any warning signs to look for?
Well, usually the warning sign is that they get a message saying, we have your data. If you want it back, here's how much you can pay us in Bitcoin. Or what we see a lot is, when an email's been compromised, they'll start getting questions from their clients or their customers saying, hey, why are you saying this bill's past due? And as soon as they see that, they realize that someone's email, Sally's email is compromised, and they've accessed her email. They've sent out invoices to every one of your customers saying, we need you to pay this right away. Here, you can pay it via credit card. Some people will pay it right away. And then that's all that, the hacker needs is somebody to pay a $2,000 invoice. And there you go again. They get their money. Your reputation's damaged because now the client or your customer is thinking that you're not protecting their stuff. They're not protecting me. So then they leave. So then it kind of snowballs into that whole thing about, reputation takes a hit, and, how do you build that back up? How do you build the goodwill back up? So I've never heard of anyone that doesn't know they're hacked. They usually know they're hacked pretty fast.
Okay. That's good to know. So be on the lookout for stuff like that. It just
Yeah.
hearing about it and thinking about what happened, the importance of it is it's just principle to me, like paramount. I could make $1 million, but if my reputation is shot, $1 million means nothing. You know what I mean? So,
Right.
okay.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the employees for a second. How big of a role do they play in keeping a company secure? Now, you talked about this a little bit. This gives you a chance to talk a little bit more about it.
Yeah. Well, the employees are probably they're your biggest security control, and they're also your weakest link. So they're the most important person in your company as far as security goes are your employees. And we say that, imagine your house, like you have in a neighborhood, you're having some break-ins and things like that. So you call your security alarm company and you're like, hey, I need you to come in here, give me the best of the best, put in sensors on every window, make sure I have the best door locks, the best house alarm. And you're sitting at home thinking, oh, this is great. Nobody's ever gonna be able to get in this house. But you haven't told your kids to set the alarm and lock the front door. So who's to blame if your kids leave the house, they don't lock the door, they don't set the alarm, somebody comes in and steals everything you have? Well, it's your fault. It's not your kids' fault. You didn't tell your kids that I need you to set the alarm. You didn't tell your kids I need you to lock the door. So that parlays into why it's so important to educate your employees on the importance of cybersecurity. So you do that through security awareness training. So you have to let them know that you need to be on the lookout for phishing attempts, that you need to be responsible for what you're clicking, websites you're going to. There's plenty of things we can do to prevent them to get to some websites. But again, the reality is most of the cybersecurity compromises come from an employee clicking on something. So they're clicking on something they shouldn't click on. They immediately have access to an environment they shouldn't be in. And an employee is the one that let them in. So if you don't train your employees on what to be on the lookout for, then it's not necessarily their responsibility. So you have to make sure that they are aware that your environment is a security first environment. And you do that through security awareness training. You put them through phishing tests. There's different things you can do to make sure that they understand the importance of it. And most employees do, but you do have a tendency to get a little lazy. This one's from the boss, I better click on that one right away. And you don't read it properly. You need to take your time. If it looks like if it's suspicious, it most likely is. Take your time. Don't do anything that says urgent. Check with people in other channels. Check with them via Teams or send them a text or call them and say, hey, I'm looking at this email. This doesn't look right. And they might tell you, yeah, that's not me. Don't bother clicking on that. So what we like to say is, you have a physical firewall that keeps some people out of your business, but it's the personal firewalls. Those are the most important, and those are the employees of your business. Those are the ones that need to be educated to be on the lookout for these types of things to make sure that the business is secure.
That's good stuff. Now, you mentioned phishing, which leads us up to our next question. Phishing emails seem to be everywhere. What are a few tips employees can use to spot and avoid them?
Yeah, and it's one of those things that it's kind of the too good to be true, or it looks too urgent to be accurate. First and foremost, you should probably be using some sort of email security. So some sort of email filtering to keep out as much as possible. With AI, it's getting much better as far as what can get through those email filters. But at least if you have a first line of defense, you don't have to worry about some of the easier ones. But employees, again, need to be very aware of emails that come through that say something that doesn't seem right. A lot of the times it's something urgent. And ones we see quite often are, let's say you're an admin to an executive. They'll get an email that says, hey, I don't want anybody else in the office knowing about this. Can you please go do this for me, or please send money here? I'm in a little bit of trouble and this does not need to get out. Well, what's the admin going to do? She's not going to go against her boss. She's going to say, oh, I better send that right away. That's the wrong thing to do. The right thing to do is to walk into the office, send a text, go to a Teams channel, and just go, hey, I got your message. Just want to make sure this is legitimate and I'm doing this correctly. So it's more on the training side of things that employees need to know what to look for. They need to know that if it's marked urgent, if it's something out of the norm, if it's, again, misspelled words, which they're getting better at. They don't do as much misspelled words. And you can also check the URL that the email is coming from. Todd Haness at CMIT Solutions, you should be able to look at my at CMIT Solutions, and it's a better chance that it's coming from me. If it says CMTSLUSTON, then obviously that's not coming from me. So there's different things you need to look for, but it is on each individual employee to be diligent in checking email, seeing what the ask is, and making sure that it's not something that seems out of the ordinary, if that makes sense.
Well, absolutely. And I hope this is impact. I believe it's impacting our listeners, because a lot of this stuff, they may not be aware. I mean, even having a tech background, the cybersecurity component has really come to the forefront along with AI in the last 10 years. And, that wasn't my specialty, which is okay, but it's stuff that even I need to know as my business grows, So if a business wants to strengthen its cybersecurity starting today, what would be the first step you would recommend?
So, well, first steps, there's quite a few things that people can do that they don't realize that are basically free. One is, of course, making sure that you turn on multi-factor authentication. Everybody thinks it's a little inconvenient, but it's very important. If you have to have another form of logging in, that stops, I think it's close to 99% of automated attacks. And that's something that Microsoft has published, saying if you're able to turn on another form of authentication, not just email, not just a password, you have to do it through your phone or you get a text, that stops the majority of it. Another thing they probably need to do is make sure that their systems are updated. So what Microsoft usually pushes out what's called patches. So patches are filling in for vulnerabilities they know exist. So if you're not updating your system, then you're not getting these patches. These patches are closing loopholes that these cyber attackers know exist. So if you don't do it, you're basically saying you're leaving your keys in the car with a sign on the window that says, please steal me, because that's what they're doing. They're sending out automated tools that are scanning thousands of devices, and they're saying, who's decided not to apply this security patch? And if you're one of the people that thinks the security patch is inconvenient because you don't like to reboot your system and it causes problems every once in a while, well, you're the one they're looking for, and they're going to be able to log right into your system because you haven't used that patch. Another thing besides the password manager, which we already talked about, is making sure you have backups. People, they think that they're not going to get compromised, so they're not worried about it. They think, well, I have everything in Microsoft OneDrive. So if it's in OneDrive, it's safe, it's secure, nothing's going to happen with it, which is entirely untrue because OneDrive is a storage solution. It's not a backup solution. So there's some pretty inexpensive ways to back up your data, whether it's on an external hard drive or you can find a solution that's online that'll back it up for a relatively inexpensive cost. And you have a little bit more peace of mind, that I have my data somewhere that I can access and I'm not worried about not just a compromise, but just a computer failure. If your computer fails, what are you going to do? You have everything you've worked for, everything you've built up over the years, you no longer have. So definitely need to have a backup regardless of if it's a PC failure or cybersecurity issue. But those are kind of some of the things that most, if you're not doing something now, those are some of the things that you should be doing.
And the external drives, the prices have become much more affordable than they were, say, 10, 15 years ago, because I remember guys work in data centers, and so you'd get these big servers that would cost thousands of dollars. But medium-sized companies, some of them can. They've got a small server room where they can do that, but then they do off-site disaster recovery type work. So yeah, but the small guy, this kind of leads us to. So the company doesn't have the big IT budget to have, the server room and disaster recovery. What's a smart, affordable way for them to protect their data?
That's a very good question. And before you start looking for someone like, our company to help you out, there's certainly some things you can do just to make sure that you're not, again, the lowest hanging fruit. I would probably say you need to do a 4-phase approach. The first phase would be to understand what you have and what you're trying to protect. So do an inventory. What are my assets? What do I have? I have a computer, obviously. Do I have anything else? Do I have an iPad? And once you understand what you have, what do you really need to protect? What's critical? So you don't need to back up everything. You need to back up my CRM, your customer relationship management software. Like that's important to me. I need to make sure I have that backed up. So that's something that you can do that's not very expensive. And then number two would be just make sure you're doing those security updates we talked about. Make sure that you're updating it when it says Windows is ready for an update. Also, if you're using Microsoft, Microsoft has built-in security tools that are free. They come on each device. Windows Defender,
Yep.
Microsoft Defender. Those are a couple things that you should make sure that you're using. If it kicks off an alert, make sure you're seeing the alert and remediating it. It's not going to do it for you. It's going to tell you there's a problem. So make sure that you're doing that. We already talked about password management. That's very important. Make sure that you're using a password manager. We can't remember all these passwords anymore, especially when we have to make complex passwords. You're not going to be able to remember it on your own. Phase
No
three would
kidding.
be kind of more into the kind of getting a little more sophisticated. Use your email security. Email security is not that expensive. It filters out some of the easy stuff. And we already talked about backup and disaster recovery. So these are all things that anyone can do. It's not expensive. Again, some of these tools are built in. You might be able to find a free password manager as long as it's not, you don't operate a 5 to 10 person company, and start utilizing those today because it's not a matter of, I don't think people should weigh the expense of cybersecurity. They should be thinking the other way. What's the cost going to be if I don't have it? So how much is it going to cost me to go out of business? How much is it going to cost me in future revenue if I get a cyber attack? So they kind of need to look at it along the lines of insurance. You don't have car insurance because you want it. You have car insurance because if you're getting a car wreck or somebody steals your car, you want somebody to pay you back for it. So you kind of have to look at it like that. You can't just say it's too expensive for me. You have to say, what's the option of not having it? What's the damage going to be? Hopefully, some of your listeners will understand that it's not just something that big companies need to do. It's definitely something that everyone needs to do. You don't want to be the lowest hanging fruit. And you've probably heard the saying before, if you're in the forest and you're getting chased by a bear, you don't need to outrun the bear. You need to outrun your buddy. So you kind of have to think of other small businesses as being your buddy. I just want to be a little bit better than them.
Right. Also, it reminds me of that commercial. It was an automotive commercial back in the day where it says, you can pay me now or you can pay me later. And where, in what we're talking about here, that little bit of, even if it's $100, $200, whatever, to get an external hard drive, maybe, I don't know, whatever, to help protect your systems versus, you get hacked or compromised, and then you end up hiring somebody like Todd who's got to come in, they got to find out the solution, and it's going to cost you more than a couple $100. So that's really important. So we're almost finished here, but this has been some great information, and we've got a little bit over, but you know what? It's okay. Sometimes I allow for that because sometimes the information is just too valuable to just cut it off in the middle, because then you're left hanging like, what in the world's going on? What else is there? So are there any compliance or legal rules small businesses need to be aware of when it comes to protecting customer information? That's a big one.
Yeah, that's a big one. And most of the people that do have compliance type concerns, they are aware of them. And that's usually in the financial industry, in the medical fields. But for the most part, if you're just there operating a business, you don't have any sort of liability to your customers' information. If you're taking credit card information, then yes, you do. You have to be PCI compliant. Of course, medical has to be HIPAA compliant. If you're in any sort of securities, you need to be FINRA compliant. So most
Yep.
companies that are in those fields, they are aware that there are some compliance concerns that they need to, and they should certainly be using someone like myself, and they most likely are, to make sure if you violate any of those rules, then yeah, you have other issues to deal with financially.
Right, right. That's some the FINRA, HIPAA, and the PCI are the three main ones, I guess, for our conversation. And if there are
There's
others,
also some for government.
that is
There's other
true.
ones for
Yes, I didn't think of
there's a
that.
lot of them. I'm thinking
And
more
those are
along the lines
usually
of kind of, go ahead, sorry.
no. Go ahead. It's all right.
I was going to say there's a long list of other there's government requirements. There's other frameworks that you can follow, NIST, CSI, things like that. There's different ones, CIS, sorry about that. There's different ones that you need to follow or could follow.
Good stuff. A lot of things that I don't even think of. I look at this as a learning opportunity for me, not just my listeners. So I appreciate that. So finally, looking ahead, what new threats or trends do you see emerging in cybersecurity that business owners should be paying attention to?
That's a good question, and it's probably a whole nother podcast. But we have a lot of issues with AI. So AI, as you're fully aware, is very prominent these days. So what people need to know about AI, first and foremost, they need an AI use policy in place in their workplace. So it kind of goes through the same thing as, if you don't know you shouldn't be using it, then you can't get reprimanded for using it. So people have to tell their employees, we do not use Chat GPT in our workforce. So it has to be a policy in place. It goes along the same lines as, if you don't have a dress code and people show up in shorts, what are you going to do? Like, nobody ever told them they can't wear shorts. So if you haven't told them they can't use Chat GPT in the workplace, then they're going to use it. And they could potentially be exposing some of
That's
your
true.
proprietary information to the AI, to the language models. So we usually tell people, make sure you have an AI policy in place, AI use policy in place. And if you are going to use AI, you have to make sure it's secure AI. So if you don't know what any of that stuff is, then have them call
Good.
me and I can explain all what they need to do with that.
Where do we go here? Thumb hit the keyboard and my screen went away. Okay, well, this has been educational for me and I hope our listeners. Hey, if somebody wants to get a hold of you, Todd, what's your email address or phone number?
Sure. My phone number, again, it's Todd Hannes with CMIT Solutions, and my phone number is 469-780-4226. You can hit extension 1, and that'd get right to me. And then my email address is my name. It's the letter T, Hannes, Haness, at CMITsolutions.com. So THANESS at CMITsolutions.com. Be happy to talk to any of your listeners about any sort of strategic guidance, AI, cybersecurity, whatever is on their mind.
That's fantastic. And Todd, again, I'm grateful you were able to join us. I know you're a busy guy, and I hate to be in the middle of that, because I remember when you're in the middle of something, you can't just walk away. And I appreciate the fact that you were able to sneak away for a little bit. So I'm going to let you go. I'm going to let our listeners go. Listeners, I appreciate you listening. It's been the Business Hub. We hope you stay active, stay productive, and be fruitful. Have a great afternoon. Goodbye.